I was asked by a couple of folks to record this. So we will be recording the discussion. So just so you're aware of that. And so I'm gonna move on to a little, forgive my slides, but I feel better when I have slides in front of me. And I want to just have you see the names and the folks in front of you that are going to introduce themselves in a moment. Eric, Karen, Oceana, and Stephanie, and then myself and Gina, but I will let them introduce themselves. And I see Stephanie first. So if the panelists could unmute themselves and introduce themselves. Stephanie, why don't you start?
Hi everyone, I am Stephanie Marini. I work at Wells Police Department and I'm currently the school resource officer at Wells Junior High School. It is my third year here at Wells Junior High, and I will say that I'm still learning very much the job and how to work with kids, especially this particular age group. But I love every minute of it, and anything I can do to help, let me know.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. We're glad that you were able to do this and that you got permission to do it. We really appreciate it. Oceana, you're up next on my view screen here.
Hi, Oceana Brandon, clinical social worker working at Marshwood High School. I've worked here with a 2-year break in the middle for about 4.5 years, but I've always worked with adolescents in a variety of settings, including wilderness therapy, therapeutic, boarding school, group home, working with kids in the juvenile justice system. So really love working with sort of high school age youth. I find them to be powerful and amazing and interesting and challenging sometimes. So I'm glad to be here and a part of the conversation.
Thanks, Oceana. Gina, you're up next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gina Brodsky, project coordinator here at Choose to Be Healthy. Former life as a school counselor and substance abuse counselor at the high school level, and it's just wonderful to see all of you here today.
Thanks. Karen, if you could unmute.
Sure. I'm Karen Simone. I'm here from the Northern New England Poison Center. We are the poison center that serves Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And we're kind of the last line of defense, or sometimes the first line of defense. If something goes wrong, we're there to help, and we handle everything from little kids grabbing what's handy to self-harm attempts, substance use disorder, and workplace or environmental exposure. So we are the 800 line you call for immediate help for anything.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Yes, that's one of the reasons that I invited Dr. Simone, because the first time I heard her speak, she said all these things that hadn't occurred to me what a resource the Poison Control Center is. So she'll talk about that pretty soon. Eric, you're up next. If you could say who you are.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me, Sally. My name is Eric Haram. I am the director for the Recovery Center at York Hospital, which is the substance use disorder treatment program, and also a parent of a sophomore in high school and a freshman in college, and happy to be here with you today.
Great, thanks. And let's see, is that everybody on our panel? That's everybody on our panel. And we've got, it looks like we're gonna have a smaller than 30 group of people. So later on, after we've had the panelists speak, I'd love to have some of the other folks that are on the call, if they want to share, I'd be happy to let them share. We've got Kelly Bailey from Department of Education. We've got Erico Farnsworth from the DEA. And so there's other folks that can speak to some of these issues. So that's just a plus for us. So thank you. So what I'd like to do is, I think we will start with prevention, because that's kind of where we start with a lot of this, although as Dr. Simone said, sometimes when something happens, you call the Poison Control Center, but I think we'll start with prevention. And Gina and I will talk to you a little bit about what our concerns are, in particular during the pandemic and as we transition out. I had asked our panelists to think about what they're seeing in their world and what they are concerned with moving forward, related to COVID or not. But Gina and I have been talking a lot about two things: adult use of alcohol in the home, and also marijuana. Today, we're going to focus on alcohol, and it is a concern, and we're going to focus on adult use alcohol and how that affects our kids. And so I found this actually just this morning. This is from a poll done at the beginning of the pandemic in April of 2020, about 2,200 adults, it says. So it's not a big research project, but it's still interesting, maybe kind of funny and interesting to look at, or not so funny and interesting to look at. And you can see the article was talking a little bit about some of the bad habits we were getting into because of being at home, eating and drinking alcohol. And then what I thought was fascinating was that they separated it out by the age of the adult. And so boomers, I might be the only boomer on the call, that is 57 to 75. Millennial, that would be Gina's group of 41 to 56. Gen X is the 25 to 40 group. And Gen Z, they didn't even bother polling. I guess the Gen Z kids couldn't be bothered. But it is interesting to see of the groups, you can see that millennials, the 41 to 56-year-olds, are the ones that have been doing more of these two behaviors to perhaps cope with the stress of the pandemic.
Sally,
yes.
I just want to say, I can't be identified as a millennial. It hurts me a little bit. So
I'm sorry.
Gen X are the 41 to 56-year-olds. We're not millennials.
Oh, sorry. You're absolutely
That's okay.
right. I said it totally wrong.
No, I spend so much time making
You
ridiculous.
look like a millennial. I spend
so much time making ridiculous jokes about millennials. I'm like, you can't put me in that category. No.
25 to 40 are
Is
the millennials. Yeah.
But it's us, it's the Gen Xers who, there's
you're not far behind. And I'm a boomer, and I've been doing some unhealthy things, but maybe not quite as much as the rest of the adult population. But yes, so the 18 to 25 is the that's the highest use, which is not represented on here. The 25 to 40 is the next highest, and you can see it pretty clearly from here. Eating in particular, which is the quarantine 15, I think that they were referring to, gaining 15 pounds. But in all seriousness, we are worried about how this stay at home, work at home, stress, depression, not having other coping skills in our lives is affecting us as adults, and then affecting our children, because we work with children, and Oceana will speak to that, and Stephanie in a moment. They're greatly affected not only by the pandemic, but our behaviors. So you can see here, this is national data that we just got recently at a really great conference on alcohol use. And you can see that 32% of adults reported binge drinking, which is unhealthy drinking, 4 or 5 drinks in 2 hours during the stay-at-home orders. And 60% said their drinking had increased. And then non-binge drinkers, so people that were drinking but not maybe drinking in an unhealthy way, increased their alcohol use by 28%. And the highest risk group of all of these were women, Black people, or people with children in the household. And so you see in particular, women had a 41% increase in the number of days of heavy drinking. As I sip my water out of my party cup here. But that obviously is a concern to us. Gina and I had many conversations last year and into this year about just anecdotes of women in particular, to be quite honest, at home, kind of having fun with the remote cocktail parties, working, but having a glass of wine, etc. And so it's certainly a concern because we know as preventionists that what kids see in their home is going to put them more at risk. Speaking of risk, this gets into the risk factors for excessive alcohol use. And so you can see here, if you look at this list, ease of access, limited coping skills, etc., you can see what puts someone at more risk to drink excessively or in an unhealthy way. And then this chart that we just got at this recent conference that we went to is specific to Maine. Our hard liquor sales, which is agent spirit sales in Maine, increased online sales increased 256%, which is crazy. And then hard liquor sales increased by 10% from 195 million to 214 million. So I think most of us who live here know that, and across the country, bars and restaurants were not considered, and stores where you can get alcohol were considered essential businesses. And even when some of our schools were closed, we were still able to get alcohol. Maine relaxed its alcohol sales laws to the point where you can order online, you can have delivery, you can get cocktails to go. What else can you do? Curbside pickup, all these things. You can have your food delivery vehicle deliver your alcohol. All of these things that came about because of the pandemic and are still with us, even though we are coming out of the pandemic. So as prevention folks, we're concerned that this increased access is not going to go away. And even though right now we're just talking about adult alcohol use, the whole point is that how it affects everyone, in particular our youth. And so you can see when you look at these risk factors, think about, the ones that have been impacted even more so because of, oh, I went by too quickly there. Whoops, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Even because of the pandemic. So isolation, certainly a huge one, and lack of our typical coping skills, whether that was exercising in a gym or hanging out with friends, etc. If any of the panelists want to comment on this, please feel free to. And then just a couple more slides of data from this, from two places, the Maine SEOW, which anyone can go on. There's the website, and you can download data, you can look at data, you can download resources to print out, etc. It's a really, really great resource. I mean, this shows just the dramatic increase in our ED visits that were related to alcohol at the beginning of the quarantine. You can see how they went down, but they were still remained high. And I think another thing I wanted to say about that original slide and poll done on the different age groups and their drinking rates going up, the good news is that I think we're hoping that the increase in alcohol use peaked at the beginning of the pandemic and is perhaps coming back to a more normal rate, but we don't know yet. And we're still concerned, and we're concerned about the norms that it's created in our communities for youth. And then this chart shows that unfortunately, as you can see, and this is specific to Maine, alcohol-related deaths have gone up quite a bit since 2015. And you can see the big jump from 2019 to 2020, a 28% increase. And it'll be really interesting for our youth data that we collect at the end of this year and our adult data. It will be interesting to see post-pandemic how some of the alcohol and other drug use looks. This is a slide that, this is something that I know intuitively, but it's interesting to see it in a visual. So this shows the dark blue, or the blue states, are the ones with the highest binge drinking rates among 18 to 25-year-olds. And this is current data. I don't have a map that shows all adult drinking. This is a specific subgroup, but it's very similar looking. I'm always fascinated to look at these maps to see where the highest drinking rates are. I think it's interesting that, unfortunate that Maine is one of the highest at 32.4. But I think it's interesting that New Hampshire right next door is not one of the highest. And then Utah over there in the West, and Washington and Nevada are some of the states that are always low for drinking and for binge drinking. And it's interesting to think about what those reasons are. That's a whole conversation in itself. And then up in the left-hand corner, we wanted to share with you our local high school grade youth, their drinking habits, at least back in 2019, and we will see how theirs were affected by the pandemic when we collect this data again at the end of the year. But not far off of our adult data, our young adult data, 32% binge drinking in the past 30 days, and then 24% of any alcohol use. And one of the folks that we heard at the alcohol conference was Dr. David Jernigan, who's an expert and a professor at Boston University, and he was a wonderful speaker. And he said something that I haven't heard anyone be quite so forthright to say, but it is true. But just the way he said it, I thought was great, because he didn't mince words. He said, you know what the biggest predictor of underage drinking is? It's parents who drink too much and who drink too often and who view alcohol use favorably. And I thought, you know, good for him for just laying it out there. There are a lot of risk factors for underage drinking, but probably the biggest predictor is the behavior of the adults in the child's life. And what does that mean? Does that mean no adults can drink? No, that's not what that means, but it means we need to be aware of how our behaviors affect our youth. And it is specific to unhealthy drinking. So Gina, let's hope we can do this smoothly. We're going to do a little interactive bit right here. And so Gina, I'll help you if you need help, but this is something that we found that Gina wanted to share with you, because we wanted to end on a positive note. All of our speakers today will hopefully talk to you about what can we all do to help our youth during these stressful times, that are simple things and things that anyone can do.
Sally, you know what? You might have to do the clicking for me, because you're the one sharing. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
sorry, I am.
That's okay. Right. Sally and I found this yesterday. It's the Search Institute. It's from the Search Institute, and it had like definitely a different take on parenting. And so it was just a stressful times relationship checkup that you can do regarding the young people in your life. So if you want to click on that for me, Sally.
Well, what I need to do is what I'm going to do is put the link to this, and let's see how this works, folks. Okay. We tested this out. I'm putting the link in the chat room. And so Gina, you can explain it a little bit more, but what we're hoping is that you can try it on your own. It'll just take a couple minutes. And if you click on that link and go through these questions, there's one page.
So there's one page that says, think of one or more young people you interact with or work with during the coronavirus crisis. Answer the following questions as honestly as you can, focusing on how much attention you give each action during these challenging times. So it is anonymous. And if you want to just think of your own children or children that you work with, and it makes you think about things differently. How are you expressing care? How are you challenging growth? How are you providing support? How are you sharing power? How are you expanding possibilities? So if you just
I'm sorry, Gina, I was just going to say that in case other people are having a hard time doing it, I'm just going to click randomly. I'm not even looking. And so that we can show them what you get after you fill it out.
Yeah.
So obviously at a different time when you have more time to think about it, you could do this.
Mm-hmm.
And Gina, can you see the results page now?
Not yet.
Oh, okay, I have to do a new share.
I don't think we see the link in the chat.
Oh, I did it.
Oh, you know what? You put it to everyone in the waiting room.
Oh,
That happens.
well, let's see. Everyone in the waiting room, everyone in the meeting. I'm sorry, folks. There you go. So take a couple minutes and maybe just click on a couple, and then we just wanted to give you a chance to see how it works. We thought it was actually quite useful.
So I'll just give them a couple minutes and then we can talk a little bit about this, but we're not going to go into it at length. You guys will have the link and you can do it on your own. And we will also send a follow-up email thanking you guys for coming, and we'll make sure that we put this in the email as well for you.
And so when you do finish it, you will see you get a score here. So I'm not so great maybe at challenging a young person's growth. And so then I would click on this and it would tell me, and I think I have to do a new share. Yes, I do.
No, I can see it. We can see it.
Good. And so it gives you some black and white things you could do. If you're connecting with young people through technology, ask them what they are or could be doing to help their parents, siblings, or others get through this difficult time. And you can see the examples and even an activity. So I could see a teacher using this. I could see a parent using this. We'll ask Stephanie when she speaks there. Seems like a good thing to do with kids that are maybe that you're maybe trying to help. Whoops, nope, don't need to subscribe.
Can you go
So-
back a page, Sally?
Sure. Oh, I think I can. Wait a minute. So Search Institute is a really great, let's see, there we go. It's not letting me go back. I gotta
That's
get-
all right.
I have to get out of that tab, I guess. There, that one. You want to
If
see
you
that
scroll
one?
down a little bit,
Sure. Do you want me to click on one in particular?
yeah, so this was one that came up for me. So I have 4 kiddos, ages 9 to 25 now. And so I have a big gamut, 3 biological, one adopted. And so I did this thinking of my kiddos, and the area that definitely showed that I could work on is the expand possibilities. So if you click on that, broadening their horizons, connecting them to others, and it just gave me some concrete suggestions. So what I liked about this tool is it made me think about parenting in a very different way, in a different approach beyond just keeping them safe and educated, that I thought was really cool. So I would encourage you to scope this out on your own when you have time, and maybe think of each of your children separately, or if you're having an issue with one particular student you're working with or what have you, this might be something that's helpful.
And that one's ironic, Gina, because it's talking about sparks, which you could talk about now or at the end, maybe at the end.
Okay.
So that is what we have from our prevention component of this. And so next, I think it would be great to hear from Stephanie, who's our SRO in the middle school. And so to talk about, what she's seeing in that age group and some concerns that she wants us to know about. Stephanie, if you want to unmute yourself, would be great. And speak up. One of the folks earlier said it was hard to hear you.
Okay. So I just wanted to let everybody know that I may get a couple of intercom announcements during this process. So if I mute you, it's just so that you don't hear kind of what's going on over the intercom here. But we here at Wells Junior High School, I think, are doing a great job at handling everything that's been going on with the pandemic, but it definitely has been a challenge. And I'll say that it's also been a challenge from the standpoint of a school resource officer because my job has really changed immensely. I'm now kind of the social distancing police at times, and trying to break up normal, I would say, junior high habits like girls wanting to drop their mask and whisper about the boys or what their plans are going to be for the weekend. And I have to kind of break that up and educate them on what's appropriate behavior and what's not appropriate behavior, and what's a good decision and what's a bad decision. And I'll say this job, when I took it 3 years ago, in my mind, I had the building safety, physical safety, lockdown drills. Hold on just one second.
Stephanie told me they were having some kind of a drill today. Wouldn't you know it? Uh-oh. I might need to go to the next person. I did want to just, oh, no, I don't. She's back. Good.
I had to shut the door. I will say that when I took this job, I really thought more about the police aspect of it and never really truly understood how multifaceted the job was. And I find myself way more often than not working on that prevention piece, because when I take a step back and look at the totality of the circumstances, I'm dealing with kids. I'm not here to put them in the criminal justice system. I'm not here to be scary or overbearing, but if I can help them make a better decision, that's kind of at the end of the day how I see a win here at the junior high, because we have ages from 10 to 14, which 10-year-olds are so vastly different from 14-year-olds. But some of the things that we're seeing are those decisions that are brought upon by impulse or peer pressure. They see things online on Instagram or TikTok of what others are doing, even if it's someone on social media across the nation that's just an influencer. If they see them vaping, they're going to think it's cool and try vaping. So I go into health classes and I teach some vaping prevention, some drinking and driving prevention. And one of the phrases I like to use a lot is the Dr. Seuss quote, that you have brains in your head and feet in your shoes, and you can steer yourself in any direction you choose. So you have to think about these decisions and how they're going to impact you. And I explain to them that their brain is still developing. They're going to make some poor decisions, and that does not make them a bad person. It just means that learning from them is important to get back up on your feet and to try again. And when I meet with the 8th graders and talk about drinking and driving, I ask them, how many people check their phone in class knowing that they're not supposed to, that it's against the rules? And the entire class raises their hand, and the teacher included. And I'll tell them that is why we will always need police, because I could tell everybody never to take your eyes off the road. Don't text and drive. Don't drink and drive. But there are just some people that will make a decision in a moment that may affect them, whether it's they get arrested or they get into a car accident. And so really that forward thinking piece, I've noticed over my couple of years here at the junior high, at especially this age group, where they're so moldable, that's kind of been my main focus. And if I see a kid that got sent out in the hall, sitting down on the ground with them, talking to them, what'd you do this time? And they'll explain kind of what they were thinking. And oftentimes they know exactly what they should have done. And I'm like, that's okay. Get back up on the horse and, do better tomorrow and show the teacher that you really do care. And so I really have noticed that decision-making piece is kind of what's been driving a lot of what I have going on here at the junior high, because we have seen issues with vaping or social media bullying, messages, private messages on Instagram or TikTok that are just downright mean, or very sexually explicit. They're watching things online that are really too old for their specific age group, that they're seeing maybe kids on the bus who are a little bit older than them watching. And so really just trying to intervene and to have open and honest conversations where it's appropriate. has kind of been the basis of where we're going. And over the course of the pandemic, I think we've seen a lot more kids online, attached to their phone, attached to their computer,
Yeah.
maybe not having as much of that social interaction as possible. So
And Stephanie, you brought something up at a meeting we had the other day which I thought was really important, that so much of what you're dealing with, the stress and the mental health issues, because these kids don't have their usual outlets to help them with this stressful, depressing time.
yeah, their coping mechanisms. I will say that I never really expected when I took this job to try to teach kids how to cope with things. But that's a lot of what I do here, whether it's, a young boyfriend, girlfriend breaks up. I mean, they don't know how to cope with going back into the classroom because their social image and how their peers see them really kind of affects their ability to focus and do the things that they're expected to do at school. And without things like sports or Girl Scouts, or, I mean, you name it, all these different things that children have had for resources, even like going to church or, these other things
Right.
that they relied on previously, with their worlds being turned upside down, that coping piece has really been a struggle, I think, for some of them, and not having those outlets. And I'm curious to see how that may affect them. My hope is that they'll be able to persevere, but there are some kids that I am concerned about because of their inability to cope and trying to just find them a positive outlet.
And just for the sake of time, Stephanie, and if you need to think about this is fine. I'd like you to think about, do you have any suggestions that a parent could do, a parent of the kids that you see? What do you think they should be doing that maybe they're not doing?
I would say that there's a couple of different things. Monitoring social media, learning more about which social media platforms your kids are on, monitoring who they're talking to. There's some online websites now where you can talk to strangers, and they've been around for a while. When I was in college, there was this thing called chat roulette, and that was a big thing. You'd go online and you never knew who you were going to get on the other end, but you'd say hello, tell them about yourself, or do something silly.
And the kids are doing about this now, and you're not the only one to tell us that. One of our school folks from Noble said that she was saying that.
So there's tons of different outlets that kids are using online, and just to kind of monitor those and familiarize yourself. Things like Snapchat, for instance, have a folder that kids can password protect, and it's called For My Eyes Only. And they'll save things in there that they don't want anybody else to see. And so learning some of these tidbits and just kind of being aware is important. But I also think maybe even more important than that is just being open and honest with the children, because if they feel comfortable telling you something, they're more likely going to tell you.
Right.
And so I always teach the kids, if you get into a bad situation, really reach out to your parents or call Wells Police Department and say, hey, I need a ride home. Like, we'd rather give you a ride home and have it be a little awkward than maybe have a poor outcome because you didn't reach out when you knew something didn't quite feel right. And so that parent-child relationship, sometimes kids just want to be heard, and, listening to what they have to say or how they feel, and explaining, well, although I understand you feel that way, this is how we're going to do things in the home. If they're like, well, I really don't feel like I should have to clean my room. Like, there's a difference, I think.
That's
try also.
That's
But
great. That's great. Thanks, Stephanie. I want to leave time at the end too, in case folks have questions for you. So thank you. That was perfect. And I will ask for our next person to speak. And I think it would be a good segue for Oceana. Oceana, I think, works with the high school kids, but she might work with everybody. So Oceana, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I do just work at the high school. We have a social worker who works K through 5, and then another social worker who works at the middle school, and we all collaborate. We meet regularly with each other. So honestly, I loved that Search Institute relationship check, and I'm excited to look at that. I feel like when you were sharing that, I was like, there's the presentation. Let's all go do that and practice it and talk about it. So thank you for sharing that resource. That was really great. And I think that might, if people are willing to sit down and do that, I mean, I think it requires that you're willing to do some self-reflection, and it requires that all of us are willing to say, maybe I could do better as a social worker, teacher, parent, school resource officer, administrator, et cetera. And so I think if you are, what an awesome resource. So thanks for that. And then a lot of what Stephanie said is the same stuff that I'm seeing. So I don't want to repeat, but when I wrote down my list of like, what am I seeing are the struggles, and then some of what we're responding to, or what might be some ways that parents and teachers, and parents have had to be teachers this year, and teachers have always had to do some parental stuff, but parents have had to really step up and be co-teachers with all the online learning this year, and that has been an extra challenge. Some of the list that came right out is, and Stephanie hit on a lot of these, reduced resilience, right? We're seeing reduced resilience and distress tolerance abilities. So that idea of, I'm really seeing teenagers struggle a lot more to tolerate distress, to tolerate those difficult situations. Stephanie gave some examples of the types of situations. But that ability to work through in the moment or deal with uncomfortable emotions has become really disruptive at home and during the school day. A reduction in problem-solving skills. Some of this is due to technology. Technology has a ton of strengths and offers a lot. It also can sort of give us the idea that, you know, if we can just look it up or be online or whatever, that we won't have to actually work through something and be patient enough to do it step by step. And I think the reduction in problem-solving skills is really problematic. Both social problems, school problems, all kinds of things. And then a reduction in effective communication. We're doing a really quick and fast, you know, I type half words and my friends understand what the code is. And even us as adults, we're texting, you know, half statements and we know what it means. And so we've actually reduced our ability to stay present and focus and communicate through something thoroughly. And then that shows up in parent-child relationships, teacher-student relationships, and peer-to-peer relationships. And so helping people slow down, and it can feel painful. So those are the things I'm seeing a reduction in: resilience, distress tolerance, problem-solving skills, effective communication. I'm seeing an increase in being easily distracted, self-medicating, and self-harming. And I use self-medicating and self-harming to be an umbrella term, right? When I talk about self-harm, I talk about self-harm through substances, self-harm through physical cutting means, self-harm through toxic relationships. So choosing toxic, damaging relationships can be a form of self-harming. Self-harm through eating or disordered eating. I try to be really clear when I talk about self-harming that it actually can look a lot of different ways. And I think we tend to just think of it as cutting, but there's a lot of ways that we can harm ourselves. And so I'm seeing an increase in those. I'm seeing an increase in, obviously, you covered a lot of the alcohol stuff, in vaping in the school setting, because that's an easy one to bring into the school. It's easy to sneak. It's easy to try to find a place. I'll tell you, the pandemic, I mean, we have less students in the building, but the pandemic, it's like we haven't had to deal, and I'm sure, Stephanie, you've dealt with this, such a reduction of sort of behavioral incidents and issues we've had to deal with, as we've just not had a lot of people in the building, or they have to be masked and they're monitored more closely. So this year's been a little different. An increase in depression and anxiety pre-pandemic, definitely post-pandemic. My goodness, are the levels of adolescent depression and anxiety just going up and up? And you all know that. But as a social worker in a high school, it's really, really tough. And it's tough to intervene with when they're at home and I can't even necessarily access them. Increase in sleep issues related to depression and anxiety, but also related to, I think, a lack of getting outside, getting fresh air, getting exercise, isolation. I'm really dealing with a lot of sleep issues this year, and students' habits and patterns being so out of whack that eating, sleeping, all that stuff is off. And then increase in self-medicating in order to try to sleep or feel better. And an increase in changes in social boundaries and relationships, partly because of all the online stuff, you know, and then partly because of the isolation from the pandemic. So just a real change in what social relationships and boundaries look like for adolescents. Should I go to some recommendations?
Sure, that would be great. I was just about to ask you, I mean, and I would, you know, be as basic as you would like or as specific as you would like. That's
Okay.
great.
Yeah. So I think when I do family work, a little two-word phrase I use to work on the relationship piece, and also actually with teachers and their students. I do this a lot at school with teachers and students, is to remember curiosity versus convincing. And Stephanie also did a brilliant job of bringing this exact thing up. You know, can you, and also the survey you opened up with, one of the things it asks, right, is can you be trusted, right? Are you building trust with your student, your child, your whatever? And a way to do that is to be curious in an open way, not in a judgmental way, and to not try to convince your student or your child this is right or wrong, because that's when they shut down and don't want to listen. So I think the two words, curiosity versus convincing, helps me remember that. Am I being curious right now, or am I trying to convince? And that relates to things like the changes in social boundaries. I find myself asking a lot, you just talked about a friend. Is that friend someone you see in person, or is that friend only online? And a lot I'll hear, oh, it's someone online. They live in Toronto. We met through whatever, right? But they're talking about them like, you know, for my age, they're talking about them like they're a friend they hang out with in person. Helps me to know that they've never actually seen this person in real life. So, you know, the curiosity versus convincing, I think, is really helpful. And then the wondering to yourself, what's the function of the behavior? We as adults tend to go right for the behavior, and we in a school system tend to go right for the behavior. You broke the rule, that behavior wasn't okay, there's a consequence and done. As opposed to, what is that behavior communicating? What is the substance use communicate, right? Why are they vaping? What's behind that? What function is it serving? What's the purpose? What's the need that it's meeting? So if I have a need for more social connection, if I'm feeling isolated, I might then have poor boundaries and seek social connections in unsafe ways. The meeting of the need for social connection is awesome, right? We and our students and our kids all deserve to be socially connected. If they go about it in a way that's unhealthy, then we don't want to shame them or shut them down around meeting the need. We want to help them learn how to meet it in a healthy way. So I think curiosity, convincing, and what's the function or purpose of the behavior.
That's great.
Helps me slow down and get behind what I'm seeing and slow me down from reacting to the behavior at face value and do a little digging. Related to that, something else that I talk a lot about is how do we accompany our children or our students through things rather than doing it for them. And Stephanie also brought this up, and I think so did that survey at the beginning, the idea of how do I learn what their world is like and sit next to them and do it with them. We use Google Classroom. I think most schools around here are using Google Classroom. And so I've worked with a lot of families this year on, hey, parent, sit shoulder to shoulder with your kiddo and look at their Google Classroom with them and learn what they're interacting with. Because otherwise you don't understand what they're talking about, right? And it causes all these problems and tension and stress and conflict. Same thing with the Snapchat example that Stephanie came up with, right? Like create your own Snapchat account or look at it with them, try to suspend your judgment, but go there with them, accompany them through it so that they learn those problem solving skills by you accompanying them through it rather than sort of telling them yes or no. And then I had written down, you know, model asking for help, model the behaviors. We already talked about that as well. I think especially in relation to substance use, right? Like what parents and teachers are modeling. One other thing that I'll share and then I'll stop is family therapy that I'm really encouraging a lot that families find a way to do some therapy together. Now, I'm going to be honest, there's like no therapist available for the next 100 years. So I'm talking about therapy like it's a thing any of us can find, and it's not, and that is terrible. If you happen to be a lucky, blessed human who gets in with a therapist. For parents, family members, significant others, sometimes, I mean, we at the high school level have some 17, 18, 19-year-olds. And so maybe it's a boyfriend or a girlfriend who's their closest caring sort of, person in their life. We have to treat the system, not just the individual. And unfortunately, there's a lot of the kid has the problem behavior, send them to therapy and fix it, instead of how do we do this work together? And I think that's true for substance use treatment. It's true for therapy around, straight up mental health issues, diagnoses, that we all benefit from working together, especially with the isolation of the pandemic. And so I really, really encourage, it takes courage to be vulnerable, I think, especially as an adult, but go do the therapy with your kid, with your family member. I have more on my list, but I'll stop.
Yeah, no, Oceana, you are amazing. And so many good ideas. I, for one, it's really important to hear about thinking about what the behavior is seeking instead of just being horrified at the behavior. I was horrified when Stephanie and someone from another school said the kids are getting on and doing these dare sharing things that get really inappropriate. My first reaction is I'm horrified, don't do that. But I think the point you make around that is really, really good. And I'm just going to ask you one question before we move on. We all know, I think, unfortunately, that the lack of enough mental health providers in the country, let alone this part of Maine. Is Marshwood, is anybody doing anything about that? Have you expanded, like how many kids you see? Are you doing anything? I mean, is there anything we can do to support the schools?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I think so part of the beauty of my role is that we have 2 social workers at the high school, and one is dedicated to special ed services. So all the students with, IEPs, with individual education plans, that kind of stuff, who have services tied to that. And then I'm available to see any other student in the building. So their school counselor can just reach out and say, I'm referring a kid. And so I think if schools, go to school counselors, go to guidance counselors, don't hesitate to reach out to them. Exactly. I think they're a really good point of contact. They'll know, hey, we have an awesome SRO, we have an awesome social worker, we have a this, we have a that. Let's create a little support team in the school. Or we're offering SERP, or we can connect you with Choose to Be Healthy because they've got some programs coming up that might be relevant.
Right.
And we, definitely, and then we obviously keep a list, not only of therapists, but of programs through York and substance use counselors. So we can be a clearinghouse of resources as well.
That's great.
We do need more. It would be really great. I also think I would encourage, family members and parents and guardians to reach out to teachers directly. That's something I'm seeing as well, is keeping those lines of communication open with teachers about what they're seeing, right? Because sometimes parents don't know what's happening behind closed doors on the screen. And so we have to be a community that connects with each other in order to help our students out, help our kids and adolescents out.
That's for sure. Thank you for all of that. Really appreciate it. And Gina's putting some other resources there in the chat. So thanks, Oceana. I think what we'll do next is we will go to Dr. Simone. And Karen, I think I made you a co-host. I did, because I think Karen's got some data on what they're seeing at the Poison Control Center, as she'd like to share that.
I do, and we'll see if I'm capable of doing this properly. So I'm looking for the share my screen. Here we go. All right, let's see if this works. And I'm going to speak and probably keep some slides up for a while. Is that viewable?
Yes. That's great.
Terrific. Okay, so I think if you take nothing home from this, as far as I'm concerned, it's that you can call, chat, or text with us 24 hours a day. If it's 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve, somebody's there, they're awake, and they're going to help you, and they're qualified. In case you don't know, the Poison Center handles about 100 calls a day for Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. And you get a nurse or a pharmacist on the line when you call. And if you stump them, you get the toxicologist on call. And every single person from the nurse through the toxicologist has training specific to toxicology. And poisoning's not just about little kids who get into things. We get a lot of calls, a quarter of our calls or more from hospitals and doctors' offices. And a large number of those involve self-harm attempts, substance use issues, and therapeutic misadventures, a lot of things that happen in schools, whether it's, funny air when somebody decides it's a good idea to use mace or pepper spray near the ventilation system, and it goes into the auditorium with all the kids, or that, spraying deer urine on the walls and ceiling for the senior prank is a good idea. Just saying that was a very expensive fix, and the asthmatics did not do extremely well with that. But we're there really for anything. So the big message is call us. And I'm going to tag on a little bit to some of what's been said, because if you ask me for kids, what am I concerned about? We're all concerned about opioids because they kill people, and anything that adults do has already been pointed out, goes on down to the children that are around them. They aren't unaffected. And in addition to that, there's e-cigarette vaping problems. We have marijuana problems, and all those sorts of things. So let me show you a little bit about what we have. So this shows you for kids less than 6 years old, what they get into. And it's mostly cosmetics and personal care products, makeup, lipstick, chapstick, shampoos, and then cleaning substances, and then swallowing batteries, and then all kinds of meds and things like that. During COVID, somebody said something about sleeping disorders. Our exposures to melatonin and little kids just grabbing it because it's out went way up. Luckily, melatonin's not very harmful, so it worked out all right. The more scary thing is if you look at kids who have near-death exposures just for the last 5 years, you can see everybody, you just heard in the news that they want everyone to prescribe buprenorphine everywhere, and we want to put it all out in the community, which sounds like a good idea. And in some ways that it is, but from the Poison Center perspective, what I can tell you is we're going to have a lot more kids getting into it. So these are exposures that could kill you. Buprenorphine usually doesn't kill children, but it can make them breathe 2 times a minute and sometimes require a ventilator or antidote for a day or two in the ICU, which I'm going to say most parents don't want to see. So it can be very dangerous. And you see other opioids and methadone. So about 1/3 of these serious exposures in kids are all related to opioids. And the next step is kind of shocking to me, cannabis. Everybody thinks marijuana is a great big joke, but these edibles are a disaster for these kids. Gummies and nerd ropes are a real problem for us. And for little kids, if they get a high enough exposure, some of them just get dizzy and we worry they might fall and hit their head. But some of them actually need help breathing. We have to intubate them and put them on a ventilator for a little bit. Some of them are having scary hallucinations and psychotic episodes. Oh dear, hang on. For a day or two, in the ICU. My screen disappeared. It's a hospital security thing. So they'll hallucinate for a day or two and sleep for 18 hours after they're done hallucinating and get the wicked munchies, which is scary when they're nauseated and they're drowsy and they might choke if they vomit. And then you can see the next 2 are ADHD medications. The teenagers have them out. They don't take them, and the little kids come around and scoop them up, and those can cause some problems. So we have all of those things. Now let's talk about the older kids. The scariest trend I've seen that is much worse during COVID, but has been going on for a few years now, is teenagers with self-harm attempts. And I'd say even the last 4 to 5 months, girls 13, 14 years and younger, it's mostly girls with some guys, and 13 and 14-year-olds and younger are much more common than they have been. I mean, look at this red line here. This is crazy. It's a lot of kids, and those are just the ones we know about. The other thing that's very scary to me is in the past, a typical 13-year-old self-harm attempt, you call it a suicide or self-harm attempt, we don't always know how serious they are about actually dying, as opposed to they want some attention and they don't feel well. But they would take 3 acetaminophen or Tylenol 4 aspirin, an ibuprofen, and 2 Benadryl. And, that brings them into the hospital and we deal with them, but it's not a big deal. Now what we're seeing is they took 200 Tylenol tablets or 2 bottles of ibuprofen. And when you take that much of something that usually is a problem, but not that big, you can die. So it's been more cases and more serious cases in very young people, especially girls. And I do believe that COVID has created a situation that has made this much worse. And some of our colleagues in Vermont who are studying this, we work with some of the folks at UVM, feel strongly that a lot of these increases correlate with iPhone use in kids and some of the interactions that happen. Even with my own staff and colleagues, it's much easier to text a bad message than to sit down face to face and have a conversation. And it removes the hesitancy that you have to say something out loud on the phone or for sure face to face. And a lot of really awful behavior happens. So I cannot tell you how much I respect and feel like what you all do is necessary, because this is what happens when kids can't cope, and it's serious. The other thing I want to point out is this marijuana, this legalization, anytime you increase the acceptability and the amount of something that's available, we're going to have increased poisonings in little kids. And it's not just little kids, it's teenagers and adults and actually elderly people who their kids say, hey, try this marijuana edible. They eat a whole brownie all at once and they're already dizzy and can fall, and they have heart problems. It increases your heart rate, makes you dizzy, you can fall, and they have some very unpleasant hallucinations if they've never gotten high before. And some of the older baby boomers have not. So we're actually getting some older adult exposures too. But I want to point out this is 1995, which is not 1970s, which is when I was in high school, where marijuana, the THC, which is the active part that makes you high, was about 4%. And up around 2014, it's already up to 12. Now I'd say we're up to about 14%. It is not the same marijuana that was around when I was young. And the effects are really enhanced and different and prolonged. So anything you think you know about marijuana, if you haven't used it in recent years or haven't used it at all, I'm telling you, it's different than what it used to be. And then we have all these concentrates, which I'm assuming some of you guys have seen, but I told you we went from 4% to what's probably closer to 14% now. And now if they concentrate it, they can get to 40 or 80%. And they put these in the vaping devices, some of them in the e-cigarette, various vaping devices, and sometimes they have other devices specifically for vaping marijuana concentrates. But it's created different kind of problems, and some of the teenagers come in with chest pain and difficulty breathing, and that whole E-Valley thing where e-cigarettes were causing people to die, even young people with terrible lung effects, that probably was due to something that was in with THC, a vitamin that was damaging the lungs and causing some deaths and serious hospitalizations in otherwise fairly healthy people. So, this whole marijuana is harmless thing. From my perspective, it doesn't really appear to be very harmless. And I'm not even talking about driving while you're impaired and that kind of thing. And the marijuana doesn't look like it used to. You can see here now that it's becoming more acceptable, there are different devices. This isn't what it looked like in 1970. It looked like a nasty roll joint or blunt, right? It was not like it is now. And then these concentrates that you can see would be pretty easy to put in an e-cigarette setup device. And they can look like anything. And then this is the big thing with the little kids. On the left is the Sour Patch Kids. Those are good. On the right, unless you look at the little veins in the eyes and the one-eyed funny looking guys, you don't know that that's marijuana gummies and nerd ropes, which right now are our biggest problems with little kids getting into them, and older kids and adults. And just with the edibles, they're getting such a high dose that even in a regular healthy teenager, it can cause some psychosis and behavior that can be dangerous for them. Not to
Karen,
mention,
I'm sorry, I had to stop you there and I didn't unmute fast enough. Go back to the nerd rope if you can. You said that earlier kind of quickly, and I don't have kids and I'm not around kids. That's what you're saying you're seeing a lot of?
yes. And think of it like licorice or gel in the middle with these little teeny crunchy nerds on the outside. And it's delicious. I didn't know what they were. I sent one of our nurses out to go get me some, and they're delicious. But to me, the one on the left is it's the candy. And the one on the right is the marijuana. If you look really close, you can see, yeah. But a little kid doesn't know this, right? And look at these. These are all, marijuana products. And, you know, Keef Cat, if you can't read, you don't know that's pot, right? The trichrome crunch. And, you know, some of the companies didn't like the Rasta Reese's and Three Rosketeers and Twix and stuff like that. So they kind of came down on it, but the gummies are out there, and the Nerd Ropes and chocolates, and kids are getting into them. Before those things, we had more commonly cookies and brownies, and block parties, taking them into school, sometimes an accident, sometimes not. So I cannot stress too enough, even for an adult, a big dose of THC is very uncomfortable. They come tachycardic, goofy, giggling, but sometimes afraid, and psychotic. And, you know, I just don't see how you would know the difference. And just to give you an idea of how it is, you can see for the kids under 6, that's the red line here, how many cases we're getting from 2011 to 2020. And even for the 13 to 19-year-olds, we're getting more cases, problems with the heart, problems with just vomiting repeatedly and they can't stop it, which basically comes from heavy chronic use. So it's a problem. And these are the usual things that we see. I think part of the issue is adults don't realize how serious it is for a little kid to get into this. And so we've had people whose kids didn't wake up for 18 hours and then they call us and say, it's been 18 hours and they're not awake and I thought they just get high. What should I do? We take them into the hospital and they're barely breathing well enough, and, you know, those kinds of things. So take home message here is this is some serious stuff. And if you're going to have this, you need to make sure it's not anywhere where kids can get into it. And it's not just kids, it's adults. We get quite a few calls about adults having problems with marijuana, and the EDs have this problem too. So the other thing I wanted to point out was the e-cigarette use has gone way up. The tobacco companies weren't making any money, so they switched over to vaping, and they've created a whole new group of young kids who are now addicted to nicotine while their brain is still developing. And at the Poison Center, you know, I guess the big thing for us is if a pet or a small child gets into a concentrated liquid of this, usually not the e-cigarette, but if they get into the refill liquid, they can die. There are very few deaths in the country, but there are some, and we have some hospitalizations related to this. Most of the other cases are allergic or irritation reactions in the mouth or lungs. My bigger concern is what this is doing to their brain development and the likelihood of them being addicted to other things in the future, because they're setting up a reward pathway while their brain's developing and they're young. And, you know, outside of that, if they're addicted to these, that's money out of their pocket every day for the rest of their lives. So some scary stuff for me, for sure. And in case you haven't seen what these things look like, these are what they look like. And they look like this, and they look like this, and they look like this. And they come in all kinds of flavors. And every time there's a new legislation passed to try and control flavors to kids, the companies find a way to work around it. So
that's right. Karen, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in here because you probably have more, but I want time for Eric to go and then time for questions.
Sure.
Let me just ask you, I think you said it at the very beginning, but maybe to reiterate, just the purpose of your 1-800 number there that's on the slide, and also the website and the resources that you have on your website as far as what we can all do with our concerns over these trends.
Absolutely. Thank you. So first of all, if you're in an emergency, call us. Second of all, if you don't have an emergency and you just have questions, I open my kid's closet and it's filled with all these pink cans and bags. What is that all about? We can answer questions. You don't have to identify yourself. You can block your number. We're still happy to talk with you. So call us for questions or emergencies. On our website, we've got blogs and A through Z's. And if you don't want to talk to a person, you can bebop around on the website and see what's going on. And then we have educators for each of the 3 states to come out and talk with parents, healthcare providers, social workers, anybody about anything from urine drug screens to e-cigarettes to marijuana or other types of poisoning.
That's great. Thank you so much, Karen. We really appreciate it. And like I said before, the website and the phone number is not just for that emergency when, God forbid, somebody maybe has been poisoned. It's a resource to prevent some of this from happening, for sure. So thank you, Karen, for talking about all of those scary things. Yes, we could have done a lot just on marijuana and our concern with increased access and vaping marijuana. But now I'm gonna, last but not least, Eric Haram is the director here at York Hospital's Recovery Center. And I wanted Eric to come on, and though we're talking about prevention mostly, I want him to tell us what they're seeing, his staff are seeing at the Recovery Center. And then Eric, if you want to speak about being a father as well, you're welcome to, but certainly tell us what you're seeing at the Recovery Center.
Sure. Great information from everyone so far. I'm really glad to be here today with you guys. And Karen, particularly, that was a lot of really great information, and appreciative of that. And I noticed in the chat also a endorsement for kind of redefining of the role of the school guidance counselor. And I noted in there that all of the school counselors these days are equipped to be able to do brief counseling, and are not somebody that we should just think about in an academic sense. My experience, certainly in high school and in the early days of college, was that I interacted with a academic counselor, not a, and there wasn't a lot of bandwidth or interest to move outside of that. And so that's a pretty big paradigm shift, and one I suspect a lot of parents haven't integrated into their thinking in terms of that as a resource when we're concerned about behavior or mood or any other types of behavior.
Eric, I'm screaming amen to what you just said. I typed that out as a former school counselor. That's something that we really did shift. And as American School Counseling Association's guidelines is that all the counselors that have, graduated from schools in the last 10 to 15 years are qualified to do brief intervention, and those that did not graduate in that time frame have to get CEUs to do that. So it is always a great place to start with your school counselor for brief intervention. Talk to them about what's going on, not just what college you want to go to. They're supposed to do overall wellness, and then you can be referred out from there. So, and sometimes referred out to in-school therapists and additional services. So thank you for reiterating that, Eric. Very important.
No, and I think that's huge. And also to just echo one of the items that Oceana had mentioned, and that was that there really is a very finite availability for community therapists and psychiatrists, particularly right now. And that's a big problem, and I don't know that it's one that is well known across the general medical continuum. We work here at York Hospital, and it's important for our general medical practitioners to know what's available and what's not. There is an increase in, should we call it, anxiety or depression related concerns and behaviors among adolescents and younger kids right now that I think we're all seeing spike. And I am aware of a number of incidents where people go see their primary physician or their pediatrician as a first item of discussion. And what I'm hearing from a lot of parents is the pediatrician wants them to see a therapist or wants them to get a psychiatrist, and they're not comfortable treating these symptoms right now in primary care. But would like to work in tandem with a community psychiatrist on these issues. And it's in many ways the same thing as saying we can't help you because you can't obtain that resource in the community right now. And I just think there's a feedback loop there with primary care, particularly, that we need to be more vocal about, right? There is, in fact, the gold standard for those providers to partner together in this care, and in the absence of that capacity, we've got to sort of shift the way we address that. And that just is a dynamic that I'm increasingly worried about, and because in my interactions with primary care, I'm trying to spread that message and make sure people are aware. And where we've got sort of a whole coalition here, I thought it would be a good time to underscore that so that we can work together to communicate that. When I think about, sort of shifting from prevention to treatment or from primary prevention to tertiary, everything you've heard, are bullets that I had. So of interest, excuse me. The use patterns for kids, particularly during the pandemic, are interesting to me. When we look at youth surveys, we're not seeing in the aggregate, spikes in new users, which is kind of unusual. But what we are seeing is increases in amounts and frequency among kids that already identified themselves as using or experimenting with substances, primarily alcohol or cannabis.
Yes, that is very true. Our marijuana rates in this area have been around 22 to 24% for several years now. So they're not changing, and everybody thinks, oh, well, that's good. But you're absolutely right. So thanks for bringing that up, Eric.
Yeah. In a separate project that I'm involved with, I've been looking at ED admissions or presentations over the past 6 or 7 years. And I won't be able to say which city, but in one of the 3 major cities in Maine, the increase in cannabis-related presentations in the emergency department went from 2,000 encounters in 1 year to over 4,000. So a doubling, and those are big numbers. And what they're seeing is a lot of anxiety-related behavior or concerns. What can appear or be psychosis, things that look like what they call serotonin syndrome, that can be really, really expensive to go through all the differential testing to determine that at the end of that $15,000 battery of tests that you have an adolescent that said, I dabbed about a half hour before I came here. And you've had this whole battery of tests because they're viewing symptoms that can appear like or mimic pretty severe and dangerous condition. Multiply that by an increase of 2,000 presentations per year, and you can see we've got a recipe for some problems. It's my personal opinion that I think a lot of those cases are disposed of in the emergency department without a lot of in-depth review. I think they're sort of viewed as you have this idiopathic stomach issue, and I found out that you're smoking pot, you should stop smoking pot, discharge. And there's all of this sort of other underlying mental health stuff that's going on that isn't being touched. And I think that's from the medical side, that's kind of the story that I'm trying to contend with. Nice endorsement, Karen. We should talk because I don't know that I know what I'm getting into. But I think in our emergency rooms, we've got to sort of figure out how to identify this, triage it, and dispose of it differently than we currently are, which is, again, to underscore it. Oh, you're smoking pot, you should stop, discharge.
Well, that's interesting because it's analogous to the way we used to treat folks that came to our ED for an overdose. We would, after they felt better, we would send them home. But now we're getting them into treatment and maybe even getting them their first doses of medication-assisted treatment. So now we're going to go this route with marijuana, although it's somewhat different. But Eric, I'm sorry, go ahead and finish your thought. And then I wanted you to maybe speak a little bit, because we're getting close to the end here, about if you're seeing anything different at the recovery center. But finish your point. I'm sorry, I interrupted. In a nutshell, because I'm now realizing it's 1:20, the biggest difference is this last year during COVID compared to, say, the past 5 years. The volume is down
by half. We're treating half as many people as we used to. There are, I can opine about why that is, and I don't know that it's necessarily helpful. I think substance use disorders are a highly stigmatized condition, and socially and institutionally, we have a lot of bias about that. During a time when we were being asked as citizens to mind ourselves and sort of make do and mend, the idea that I'm going to reach out for what most of us consider a self-acquired chronic condition, and that has traditionally been viewed as, just stop it. I think people are less reticent to, or more reticent to ask for help and to reach out and to go to treatment. We're also in a time culturally when we're being asked to reserve healthcare capacity for our most ill and folks who are symptomatic or positive with COVID, or have other concomitant medical conditions that would make that much worse. And so I think just generally, the public is less likely to reach out for medical help, particularly with such a highly stigmatized condition. We're also 100% virtual. All treatment is being delivered on Zoom. And where that's been really attractive and great for some narrow bands of the populations we treat, there are others who live in areas in Maine where, whether you've got a 5G plan or not, you're not going to get consistent enough reception to stay in the Zoom group. And that's a significant problem. So those are some of the dynamics that we're contending with. We continue to see about 20% of the total population that we treat with opiate use disorder. The other 80% tends to be primary alcohol. We're seeing an increase in the co-use of methamphetamine and with opioids. And generally speaking, I just saw this survey last week from a national polling firm that I won't be able to tell you the name of now, that identified on an annual basis through surveying about 25,000 people, to what extent does your alcohol use interfere with your employment obligations? And for example, last year that was in the 24 to 26% range. This year it was 49%. So that's like 100% increase this year to last year. And if you think, that 25,000 adult respondents said yes, my current alcohol consumption is interfering with my career obligations. That sort of sets the stage. We shouldn't be treating half the number of people that we did last year, but we are. And so that's briefly kind of a nutshell on how things are going on the adult side of the treatment. I want to put in a plug, Sally, for John Cross and the knowyouroptions.me website. There are 15 county navigators or liaisons that have been hired and trained for York County. The individual's name is John Cross. He works in Sweetser and is connected to the Kennebunk Police Department. His email address is on that website, and anybody who has questions about substance use or concerns or is looking for help navigating can reach out to him and receive help.
Thank you, Eric, for remembering to talk about John. He's great. And say the website again, and Gina, maybe you could type it in the chat, or you could type it in the chat, Eric. It's knowyouroptions.me.
Correct.
Knowyouroptions.me. If somebody could type that in there so we have a record of it, that would be great.
Yep.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you. And sorry I left you for last, but that's kind of the little trajectory I was thinking of. I do want to end on some resources. So let me share my screen again. And as I'm sharing my screen, if anybody has a specific question for any of our panelists, that would be great. You could put it in the chat, or you could actually at this point unmute yourself. I think we're a small enough group so that you could do that. I'm going to get to the last couple pages on our PowerPoint. We are going to put the link to the recording of this on our website as soon as I figure out how to do that. I don't think it's very difficult. Here's some resources that we've got for folks. Those are on our website. We didn't get a chance to talk about Sell for Me. Kelly Bailey's on the line here. Sorry, Kelly, but we do promote this quite a bit. It's a wonderful resource for parents and for teachers. Drugfree.org is still the best place to go if you have any questions about substance use or how to get help. It always has been, and it still is. And then to the points that we made during the conversation, what can you do? You can contact your school's counselor, social worker, or nurse. You can contact your child's doctor or nurse practitioner, although I do agree with Eric, there is often a disconnect between what they're able to do and how they're able to help, and sending people off to someone else. There's the phone number 24/7, as Karen reminded us, for the Poison Control Center. And the Recovery Center, where Eric and staff help folks with addiction and substance use disorder, 351-2118. And I want to really emphasize, just like the Poison Control Center, the main crisis line and the Suicide Prevention Lifeline are not numbers to only call in a dire emergency. I have called both of them. I've called the crisis line because I didn't know how to get help for someone who needed help. And I was having the crisis of not knowing what to do. The person was not going to die. I just didn't know where to go. And that's what they're there for. Same with the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I called to talk to them about how I could speak to someone in my life who might be having problems. So please don't think of some of these helplines as emergency only, because they're there for helping you at all times. And so let's see, we are going to share the link to the recording. Karen has nicely offered to share her slides, and I can put the PowerPoint that we had together. Thank you, Kelly. I'm just looking in the chat.
I'm going to say,
yes, go ahead, Gina, go ahead.
I just want to tell folks about this tool that we've recently found. I think it came out of Canada, but is very reputable, based on science. And the only thing I'm annoyed with is it's checkyourdrinking.net, because that limits you to thinking it's just to assess your drinking or a youth's drinking habits, but it actually does assessments for cannabis and anxiety and depression, and just gives you some gentle results, a starting point. It's not diagnostic in any way, but it gives you a starting point. For instance, if you took the assessment on cannabis use and your own cannabis use, or you're working with a student and you're like, well, let's see, sometimes students would say to me, I don't know if I have a problem or not. Like, I think what I'm doing is normal. Well, when I'd sit down with them and do a tool like this with them, the feedback you get is, your marijuana use is more than 75% of people in your age group. And that puts you at this level of risk for a future issue. It's very user-friendly. I highly recommend it. Any of you on the call or on the Zoom right now, or if you're working with a student who might be open to exploring whether or not they have an issue, it's something you can sit down and do alongside them, which is what Oceana was saying, going alongside, being in the passenger seat for the ride with your child or with your student, in discovering and investigating together is often your best bet.
I don't see any other questions. If anybody has a question, feel free. It's 1:30 right now. If you have one, we're still here. Erico from the DEA is got a youth training coming up. We will be talking about that. We'll share all of this information with you. And I guess I'd just like to say thank you, everyone, very much. I learned a lot too, as I always do, hearing the experts speak. Thank you to our guest panelists, Oceana, Stephanie, Eric, and Karen, and Gina. As always, thank you for being my co-hostess. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your week. Take care. Bye-bye.